The crack echoed through the valley like a gunshot. One moment John Harker was confidently navigating the narrow mountain ledge, his trusted hiking boots gripping the rocky terrain as they had done countless times before. The next moment, the ground beneath him simply vanished. Gravity took hold with terrifying speed as the ledge crumbled away. His body tumbled through open air, a confusing blur of blue sky and jagged rock faces spinning around him. The violent impact knocked the air from his lungs, and then came the sickening sound of breaking bone. Pain exploded through his left leg as he finally came to rest at the bottom of a steep ravine, 40 feet below the trail. John had always found peace in the solitude of the wilderness. At 45, he had hiked most of the challenging trails in North America, always preferring to journey alone. The Blackwater Ridge in the northern Rockies was supposed to be his latest conquest, a remote area known for its pristine beauty and challenging terrain. Few hikers ventured this deep into the backcountry, which was precisely why John had chosen it. The untouched landscapes offered perfect subjects for his photography, another passion that had filled the photo albums in his cabin back home. This morning had started like any other on the trail. John had woken before dawn, prepared a simple breakfast over his portable stove, and meticulously packed his gear. The weather was perfect, crisp mountain air filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. His camera had already captured dozens of spectacular shots: a golden eagle soaring above the treetops, morning mist rising from the valley floor, and delicate alpine flowers clinging to seemingly impossible perches on rocky outcrops. The isolation that John had always cherished now transformed into his greatest threat. No one knew exactly where he was. His detailed hiking plan, left with his sister, only specified the general region he intended to explore. The wilderness stretched for miles in every direction, with no roads or cabins nearby. The nearest ranger station was at least 20 miles back, and John had not seen another hiker in 3 days. As the initial shock subsided, John attempted to assess his situation. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Sharp pain radiated from his ribs when he tried to move, suggesting they were cracked or broken as well. His backpack had fallen nearby, contents scattered across the rocky ground. Most worryingly, his satellite phone lay smashed against a boulder, the screen shattered beyond repair. The steep walls of the ravine surrounded him on all sides, impossible to climb even if he had been uninjured. The realization settled over John like a cold shadow. He was completely alone, severely injured, and with no way to call for help. The afternoon sun beat down on John as he lay stunned in the ravine. His photographer's instinct had been his undoing. He had spotted a rare mountain goat perched on an outcropping and edged closer to the rim for a better angle. The loose shale had given no warning before collapsing beneath his weight. The fall had happened so quickly that John barely had time to react, tumbling head over heels down the steep slope before smashing into the ravine floor. Now, as his senses gradually returned, pain became his entire world. Each breath sent shards of agony through his chest. His left leg lay twisted beneath him, the bone visibly protruding through his torn hiking pants. Blood soaked the fabric, forming a small pool on the rocky ground. When John attempted to shift his position, the white-hot pain nearly caused him to black out again. His right ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, likely sprained or broken as well. A deep gash ran across his forehead, blood trickling into his eyes and blurring his vision. John forced himself to remain calm. Panic would only waste precious energy. With agonizing slowness, he dragged himself toward his scattered supplies. His water bottle had survived the fall, though half its contents had spilled out. The first aid kit was intact, but its basic supplies were woefully inadequate for injuries of this severity. His hands trembled as he tore open packets of gauze, pressing them against the worst of his bleeding wounds. The pain medication in the kit was limited to a few over-the-counter pills, barely making a dent in his agony. John knew that he needed to splint his broken leg, but the mere thought of manipulating the shattered bone sent waves of nausea through him. Nevertheless, he gathered 2 straight branches and, gritting his teeth against the pain, managed to create a crude splint using strips torn from his spare shirt. The effort left him gasping and covered in cold sweat. John glanced at his watch. Almost 4 hours had passed since the fall. The sun would set in another 3 hours, bringing with it the dangerous cold of a mountain night. He needed to call for help immediately. John reached for his backpack, digging desperately for his satellite phone. The device had been specially designed for wilderness expeditions, capable of sending emergency signals from almost anywhere on the planet. His heart sank as he held the cracked unit, its screen shattered beyond recognition. He pressed the power button repeatedly, but the phone remained lifeless. His regular cell phone was equally useless, showing no signal bars in this remote canyon. John tried anyway, dialing emergency services over and over, each attempt as futile as the last. He even climbed onto a nearby boulder, ignoring the excruciating pain, hoping to catch even a single bar of reception. Nothing. As the reality of his situation became clear, John felt a creeping sense of dread. The hiking trail he had been following was rarely used, especially this late in the season. His emergency contact, his sister, would not expect to hear from him for at least another 4 days. By then, exposure, blood loss, or infection would likely claim his life. John scanned the steep walls of the ravine, looking for any possible escape route. The rocky faces rose nearly vertical on all sides, impossible to climb even for someone in peak condition. He was trapped in a natural prison, his broken body failing him, with no way to call for rescue. Night was approaching, and with it, the bone-chilling cold of the mountains. John gathered what supplies he could reach and began the painful process of preparing for a long, desperate night. The howl of a distant wolf only emphasized his complete isolation in the vast wilderness. The first night in the ravine passed in a haze of pain and semi-consciousness. John drifted in and out of awareness, shivering violently despite wrapping himself in his emergency thermal blanket. By morning, a grim acceptance had settled over him. No immediate rescue was coming. His survival depended entirely on his own abilities, severely limited by his injuries. John took inventory of his supplies as the gray dawn light filtered into the ravine. 1 liter of water remained in his bottle. His food consisted of 2 energy bars, a package of beef jerky, and a handful of trail mix. Under normal circumstances, these rations might last 2 days if carefully rationed. In his current condition, with his body desperately trying to heal severe injuries, the calories would burn much faster. The morning brought a surge of irrational hope. Perhaps someone had seen him fall. Maybe another hiker would pass by above and notice the disturbed edge where he had fallen. John even attempted to call out, his voice echoing weakly against the stone walls before fading into silence. The effort sent spasms of pain through his chest, confirming his suspicion of multiple broken ribs. As the morning progressed, John crafted a makeshift shelter using his tarp and broken branches. The simple task exhausted him completely. Fever had begun to set in, likely from infection in his open leg wound. The skin around the break had turned an angry red, hot to the touch and ominously swollen. John applied the last of his antibiotic ointment, knowing it was woefully inadequate for such a serious injury. By midday, the mental strain had become as challenging as the physical pain. John found himself calculating his odds of survival with cold detachment. Without medical attention, the broken leg might develop gangrene. Without water, dehydration would kill him within days. Without shelter from the elements, exposure would take him even sooner. As if sensing his dark thoughts, the weather began to turn. Dark clouds gathered above the ravine, blotting out the sun that had at least provided some warmth. The temperature dropped rapidly. The first fat raindrops struck John's face as he struggled to improve his rudimentary shelter. Within minutes, the gentle rain transformed into a driving downpour. Water streamed down the ravine walls, forming muddy rivulets that threatened to wash away his meager camp. Wind howled through the canyon, driving the cold rain sideways and penetrating John's layers of clothing. His hands grew numb as he fought to secure his tarp against the gusting wind. The combination of pain, fever, and rapidly dropping temperature left him disoriented and weak. John knew that hypothermia was becoming a real threat, potentially more immediate than his other injuries. As darkness fell on his first full day in the ravine, John huddled beneath his failing shelter, soaked to the skin and shaking uncontrollably. The promising morning had given way to a night that threatened to be his last. Dawn broke with cruel indifference to John's suffering. The storm had passed, but it had left him in worse condition than before. His clothing remained damp despite his best efforts to wring out the excess moisture. The cold had settled deep in his bones, a constant companion to the throbbing pain of his injuries. John tried to move and discovered that his body responded sluggishly, as if disconnected from his commands. His broken leg had turned an alarming shade of purple around the wound. The pain had evolved into something almost living, pulsing with each heartbeat. When John touched the area, the heat radiating from it confirmed his fears. Infection had taken hold, sending tendrils of poison through his bloodstream. His forehead burned with fever, while the rest of his body shivered with cold, a contradictory misery that clouded his thoughts. John reached for his water bottle with trembling hands. Only a few swallows remained. He allowed himself the smallest sip, just enough to moisten his cracked lips and parched throat. The single energy bar he had rationed for the day looked unappetizing, but he forced himself to eat half, knowing his body desperately needed the calories to fight infection and maintain body heat. By midday, the sun had climbed high enough to cast light directly into the ravine. John had hoped the warmth would provide some relief, but the fever made the sunlight feel like a punishment, baking his already overheated skin. He dragged himself into a patch of shade, the movement reopening his wounds and leaving a small trail of blood on the rocky ground. The afternoon brought the first hallucinations. A rustling sound convinced John that rescuers were approaching, and he called out with what little strength remained in his voice. Only the echo answered him. Later, he clearly heard his sister calling his name, the sound so real that tears formed in his eyes when he realized it was merely his mind playing cruel tricks. As the second day in the ravine wore on, John found himself speaking aloud to people who were not there. He had conversations with old friends, apologized to former lovers, and made peace with family members. A part of him recognized these as signs of his deteriorating condition, but another part welcomed the company, even if imaginary. The sunset painted the canyon walls in brilliant orange and red, a display so beautiful that John found himself reaching for his camera before remembering it had been destroyed in the fall. He laughed bitterly at the irony, a lifetime spent capturing nature's beauty, only to have nature itself become his executioner. As darkness enveloped the ravine once more, John made a decision. If rescue had not arrived by the following sunset, he would use his remaining strength to crawl toward a nearby stream he had spotted. The journey would likely kill him in his condition, but dying while attempting to save himself seemed preferable to wasting away in this natural prison. The choice brought a strange sense of peace. Having a plan, even a desperate one, gave him purpose. John watched the stars appear overhead, brilliant and indifferent to human suffering. The vastness of the night sky emphasized his insignificance in the wilderness. He had always sought solitude in nature, and now nature would ensure his ultimate solitude. As consciousness faded, John accepted that rescue might never come. The third morning arrived without John being fully aware of the transition from night to day. His consciousness had become a fragmented thing, broken into disconnected moments of clarity amid long stretches of feverish delirium. His tongue felt swollen in his mouth, sticking to his teeth in the roof of his mouth. The last of his water had been consumed hours ago, leaving nothing to quench his desperate thirst. His lips had cracked and bled, the metallic taste of blood a cruel reminder of fluids his body could not afford to lose. Hunger had become a hollow presence in his stomach, though the feeling had dulled compared to the previous day. His body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions, conserving what little energy remained. The energy bars and trail mix were gone. John had even chewed on leaves and bark from nearby plants, seeking any moisture or sustenance, but his stomach had rejected these offerings, causing painful dry heaves that worsened his rib injuries. His physical condition had deteriorated dramatically. The broken leg now barely registered pain, replaced by an alarming numbness that spread upward from his foot. When John managed to focus his eyes enough to examine the limb, the discoloration had spread well beyond the wound site. Dark streaks ran up toward his thigh, vivid markers of the infection raging through his system. His urine had turned a dark amber color, another sign of severe dehydration. In one of his lucid moments, John realized he was dying. Not the abstract possibility of death that had haunted him since the fall, but the imminent, undeniable process already underway in his failing body. Rather than fear, the realization brought a strange clarity to his thoughts. John began to mentally prepare for what seemed inevitable, organizing his remaining consciousness as one might organize a desk before a long absence. He thought of his sister, who would eventually report him missing when he failed to check in. He hoped she would not blame herself for not alerting authorities sooner. He thought of the family cabin he had inherited from their parents, filled with photo albums documenting his travels. At least he would leave something behind, images of the natural world he had so loved. Regrets surfaced as the day wore on. Relationships he had sacrificed for his solitary lifestyle, the children he had never had, the career he had abandoned for the freedom of freelance photography. John had always defended his choices as prioritizing experiences over possessions, freedom over security. Now, alone in the wilderness that had always been his sanctuary, he wondered if the trade had been worth it. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ravine, John closed his eyes. He had neither the strength nor the will to attempt his desperate crawl to the stream. Instead, he focused on his breathing, each inhalation a small victory. He hoped the end would be peaceful, a gentle transition from this world to whatever came next. A deep grunting sound pulled John from his semi-conscious state. His eyelids felt weighted with lead as he forced them open, blinking to clear his blurred vision. What he saw turned his blood to ice. Less than 30 feet away stood a massive grizzly bear, its brown fur catching the late afternoon sunlight. The animal was enormous, easily 7 feet tall when standing on its hind legs, with a distinctive hump between its shoulders and powerful front limbs ending in long curved claws. Primal fear surged through John, temporarily overriding the pain and weakness that had consumed him. His heart hammered against his broken ribs, sending fresh waves of agony through his chest. He had encountered bears before, in his years of wilderness hiking, but always from a safe distance or with proper precautions in place. Now he lay completely exposed and vulnerable, unable to run, climb a tree, or even stand to appear larger. The grizzly lowered its head and sniffed the air, clearly catching John's scent. Its small eyes, nearly lost in its massive head, fixed on him with unnerving intelligence. The bear took a step forward, then another, moving with surprising grace for such a large creature. John remained perfectly still, knowing that any sudden movement might trigger the bear's predatory instincts, though he suspected his fate was already sealed. The bear approached with deliberate slowness, occasionally stopping to sniff the air again. Now only 15 feet separated them. John could see the animal's powerful muscles rippling beneath its thick coat, could hear its heavy breathing, and smell its musky odor. He felt a strange calm settling over him. After days of suffering and the slow approach of death by exposure and infection, a quick end seemed almost merciful. John closed his eyes, not wanting to watch the final charge. He had read that bear attacks were incredibly violent and painful, but surely over quickly. He wondered if his body would ever be found, or if the wilderness would reclaim him completely, leaving no trace of his passing. He waited for the sound of rushing movement, for the impact of the bear's massive weight and the tearing of claws through flesh. Instead, he heard the sound of earth being displaced. John cautiously opened his eyes. The bear had moved past him and now stood about 10 feet to his right. Incredibly, the animal was digging into the ground with powerful, purposeful movements. Dirt and small rocks flew between its legs as its claws tore into the earth with remarkable efficiency. The bear seemed completely focused on this task, as if John no longer existed or posed no interest. Confusion replaced fear in John's fevered mind. This behavior made no sense. Bears sometimes dug for roots or to create dens, but this digging appeared strangely deliberate. The animal worked with what seemed like purpose, periodically stopping to sniff the deepening hole before continuing its excavation. John watched in bewilderment as the bear ignored him completely, intent on its mysterious task. Against all odds and expectations, the bear had appeared only to dig into the earth rather than tear into the helpless human lying nearby. John could not comprehend what was happening, but he remained motionless, afraid that any movement might remind the bear of his presence and change its inexplicable behavior. The bear continued digging with focused determination. After several minutes of powerful excavation, a sound emerged from the hole that made John's parched throat constrict with longing. The unmistakable gurgle of water. The bear had somehow uncovered a hidden spring, previously trapped beneath layers of soil and rock. Clear water bubbled up from the ground, pooling in the depression the animal had created. John watched in disbelief as the bear lowered its massive head and drank from the spring, lapping at the water with its large tongue. After quenching its thirst, the grizzly turned and looked directly at John, as if assessing him. Then, in a movement that defied all logic, the bear stepped away from the spring, creating a clear path between John and the water. Driven by desperate thirst, John began to drag himself toward the spring, expecting the bear to charge at any moment. Each movement sent daggers of pain through his broken body, but the promise of water provided motivation beyond reason. The bear simply watched, making no aggressive moves as John painfully closed the distance to the spring. The first touch of water on his cracked lips felt like a miracle. John cupped his hands and drank carefully, knowing that consuming too much too quickly could make him ill. The water was cold and sweet, carrying minerals from deep within the earth. As hydration began to clear the fog from his mind, John noticed something else the bear had uncovered in its digging. Protruding from the soil near the spring were gnarled roots with a distinctive reddish color. John recognized them from his wilderness survival training as wild ginseng, known for its medicinal properties, particularly for reducing fever and inflammation. In his condition, these roots could mean the difference between life and death. John tentatively reached for one of the roots, glancing at the bear for any sign of aggression. The animal remained still, its intelligent eyes tracking John's movements. After drinking his fill and collecting several roots, John retreated to his makeshift shelter. The bear suddenly moved again, this time circling around a large rock formation at the edge of the ravine. It stopped and looked back at John, then continued forward, disappearing behind the rocks. Curiosity overcame fear, and John began the agonizing process of dragging himself in the direction the bear had gone. Behind the rock formation, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, John discovered the entrance to a small cave. The opening was just large enough for a human to enter by crawling, though certainly too small for the fully grown grizzly. John peered inside and saw that the cave extended several feet into the ravine wall, offering perfect shelter from the elements. Dry leaves and pine needles covered the floor, providing natural insulation from the cold ground. John realized with astonishment that the bear had led him to not one but three critical survival resources he could never have accessed in his injured state. Water from the spring to fight dehydration, medicinal roots to combat infection and fever, and now shelter that would protect him from the harsh mountain nights. As the significance of these discoveries sank in, John looked around for the bear. The massive animal stood at a distance, watching him with what John could only describe as intentional awareness. This was not the random behavior of a wild animal. The bear was deliberately showing him how to survive. John chewed on a piece of the ginseng root, its bitter taste a small price to pay for its healing properties. For the first time since his fall, a fragile hope began to form. With water, medicine, and shelter, he might survive long enough for rescuers to find him. And all because a predator that should have ended his life had instead become his unlikely guide. The next morning, John woke feeling marginally better. The water and medicinal roots had begun their work, reducing his fever and providing essential hydration. The cave had protected him from the nighttime chill, allowing his body to conserve precious energy. Still, he remained dangerously weak and hungry, his body demanding nourishment to heal the severe injuries. Movement at the cave entrance caught his attention. The bear had returned, and in its massive jaws hung the limp form of a rabbit. The grizzly dropped the fresh kill just inside the cave opening, then backed away several feet. John stared in amazement at the offering. The bear seemed to be providing him with food, just as it had led him to water and shelter. John had no means to cook the rabbit, but his desperate situation left little room for squeamishness. Using a sharp stone, he skinned and cleaned the animal as best he could with his limited strength. The raw meat was tough and gamey, but to his starving body, it tasted like the finest meal. The protein and nutrients flooded his system, providing essential fuel for healing. Over the following hours, the bear demonstrated behaviors so extraordinary that John questioned his own sanity. The animal used its claws to strip bark from certain trees, then carried the strips to John. Through trial and error, John realized these particular bark fibers could be softened and woven into crude rope. The bear also uncovered specific stones with sharp edges, perfect for cutting and scraping. With these simple materials, John created primitive tools. He fashioned a more effective splint for his broken leg. He wove a collection basket for gathering more medicinal roots and edible plants that the bear revealed to him. He even crafted a crude container for carrying water from the spring to his cave shelter. As days passed, John began to regain some strength. The infection in his leg slowly receded, though the broken bone would require professional medical attention to heal properly. His ribs still caused pain with each breath, but the acute agony had subsided to a manageable ache. Most importantly, his mind cleared as hydration and nutrition restored his cognitive functions. During this recovery period, something remarkable developed between John and the grizzly. They established a rudimentary form of communication. John discovered that a specific low humming sound would bring the bear closer, while a sharp hiss would cause it to back away. The bear, in turn, used different postures and movements to convey its intentions. A particular head movement signaled the presence of food. A specific paw gesture indicated danger nearby. One afternoon, a sudden mountain storm descended on the ravine. Thunder cracked overhead as lightning illuminated the darkened sky. Rain poured down in blinding sheets, and hail pounded the rocky ground. John retreated deep into his cave, but water began to seep through cracks in the ceiling. The temperature dropped rapidly, threatening the progress his body had made toward recovery. As John huddled against the cold, a massive shape blocked the cave entrance. The bear had returned and was deliberately positioning itself in the opening, its huge body acting as a living barrier against the elements. The animal's thick fur repelled the rain, while its enormous bulk blocked the wind. Heat radiated from the bear's body, warming the small cave. Throughout the night as the storm raged, the bear remained at its post, protecting John from exposure that might have reversed his fragile recovery. John fell asleep to the sound of rain on fur and the rhythmic breathing of the massive predator that had become his unlikely guardian. After 2 weeks in the ravine, John had recovered enough strength to attempt leaving his natural prison. The bear seemed to sense this change, growing increasingly restless around the cave entrance. One morning, the animal appeared and paced back and forth, looking at John and then toward a section of the ravine wall that appeared less steep than the others. John gathered his makeshift tools in the remaining water, then followed as the bear led him along a path he had never noticed before. The route zigzagged up the ravine wall, revealing natural footholds and handholds that would have been impossible to discover from below. Despite his still healing injuries, John managed to climb slowly, the bear patiently waiting at each difficult section. At the top, exhausted but triumphant, John discovered they had emerged directly onto a marked hiking trail. The bear had somehow known exactly where human paths existed in this wilderness. As John caught his breath, he spotted a metal tag partially embedded in the bear's ear, nearly invisible beneath thick fur. Understanding dawned on him. This wasn't just any wild bear, but one that had once been tagged by researchers or wildlife officials with prior human contact before returning to the wild. The sound of voices drifted through the trees. Other hikers were approaching. John turned to thank his savior, but the bear was already retreating into the forest, pausing only once to look back at the human it had inexplicably chosen to save. When the hiking party found John minutes later, they saw only a man with incredible injuries and an even more incredible story of survival. As John was carried to safety, he knew he had experienced something beyond ordinary explanation, a connection that transcended the natural barrier between species. His life would never be the same. If you found this story of survival and unexpected connection moving, consider subscribing to our channel for more extraordinary tales that challenge our understanding of the natural world. Every day we share remarkable true stories that reveal the mysteries and wonders all around us. Join our community of explorers and never miss another amazing journey.